24 radiologists, trained specialists, people who make a living reading lung scans. They were handed a stack of images and asked to find nodules, routine work, the thing they had done thousands of times. Into the last scan, the researchers pasted a picture of a gorilla, not a subtle one, 48 times the size of the thing they were looking for. 20 of the 24 did not see it. And here is the part that should bother you. The eye tracking shows that most of the ones who missed it looked directly at it. Their eyes landed on the gorilla. It registered nowhere. These people were not careless. They were the opposite. I'll come back to what happened to them. First, look at what is happening to you. In every craft, there comes a point where you stop improving. Not because you stopped working. You are working harder than ever. You know more than the person you were 5 years ago, and you are better at the job by every measure you can name. And yet something has gone quiet. The work comes out competent. It does not come out alive. Most people call this burnout, or age, or a bad stretch. The Japanese theatre master who wrote about this problem first, 600 years ago, made a different diagnosis. The problem is the skill itself, he said. Not the absence of it, the presence of it. The moment you get good at something, you start going blind. The word is Shoshin, 2 characters. The first is sho, first, initial, the very beginning. The second is shin, heart or mind. In Japanese, those are one word, first heart, first mind. If you have heard it before, you probably heard it from an American Zen teacher named Shunryu Suzuki, writing in 1970. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. That line comes from Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, assembled from talks Suzuki gave to a small group in California. It became one of the most influential Zen books ever published in the West. It is a beautiful sentence. It is also, in one important way, softer than the original, because the word did not start in Zen. It started in the theatre. Zeami Motokiyo was born in 1363, a child actor, the son of an actor, and by the time he was old, he had turned the form we now call no into something a shogun would sit down and watch. He wrote treatises, not philosophy, manuals, notes for the actors who would come after him, written by a man who had spent 60 years on a stage and knew exactly how performers go under. In his early 60s, he wrote one called Kakyo, the mirror of the flower. In it, he set down the line he is still remembered for. Shoshin wasuru bekarazu. Do not forget Shoshin. Here is what almost every modern version of this idea leaves out. Zeami did not say, stay curious. He did not say, keep an open mind. He was not talking about attitude at all. He said, do not forget what you were like when you were bad. Shoshin for him is not gentle innocence. It is memory. Specifically, the texture of your own incompetence, the stiffness, the wrong choices, the things you could not do yet and did not yet know you could not do. He is telling a master performer to keep that within reach, not as humility, as a working tool. Then he does something stranger. He splits it into 3. Before the 3, understand the mechanism, because Zeami is describing something real, and there is nothing mystical about it. When you are new to something, you have no categories. There is only what is in front of you, because you have nothing else to compare it against. Someone who knows nothing watches a swordsman and sees a man moving. That is the only material he has. Skill is the building of those categories, one at a time. That is what learning is. You assemble a library of patterns, and every pattern saves you work. You stop deriving and start recognizing. This is exactly why experts are fast. The pattern arrives before the analysis does. But recognition is a trade. Every time you recognize something, you have declined to look at it. There is a way to measure this. Chess. In 1973, 2 researchers, William Chase and Herbert Simon, tested master players against novices. Show a board position for a few seconds, cover it, ask the player to rebuild what they saw. On real game positions, the masters placed roughly 3 times as many pieces correctly. The expected result. That is what expertise is. Then the researchers arranged the pieces at random, configurations that could never occur in a real game. The master's advantage almost entirely disappeared. Same pieces, same board, same few seconds. The master's memory was not better than the novice's because it had never been storing pieces, it had been storing patterns. Take the pattern away and there was nothing left in his hands. What the expert sees is not the board, it is his own library of the board. So the expert watching that swordsman does not see a man moving. He sees a stance he knows, a transition he has seen 10,000 times, a category. In almost every case, he is faster and more accurate than the beginner, and when the man in front of him does something the category does not cover, he is slower. Sometimes he never sees it at all. This is the part people misunderstand. Expertise does not make you worse at your field. It makes you worse at the exact moment your field changes, or the thing in front of you is genuinely new, and you cannot feel it happening. That is the whole problem. The category fires before you are aware of looking. There is no sensation of having missed something. There is only the sensation of knowing. Go back to those radiologists. They were tuned so precisely to the shape of a lung nodule that a shape which was not a lung nodule failed to exist. Expertise had not made them careless. It had made them selective, which is the same failure, wearing better clothes. Zeami watched this happen to actors. More than 500 years before anyone put a gorilla in a medical scan, a performer would master a role so completely that the mastery showed, and the audience would watch something technically without a flaw and feel nothing. He gave the missing thing a name, Hana, the flower. Hana is his word for the quality that makes a performance land on the person watching it. It is not skill, and he is explicit about that. An actor can have complete command of the form and no flower whatsoever. Hana is the sense that the thing in front of you is happening now, for the first time, and could go either way. The moment a performance becomes a demonstration of competence, the flower is gone, and his claim about where it lives is the part that should unsettle you. The flower, he wrote, belongs to the performer who does not yet fully know what he is doing. That is not his most famous line about the flower. This is, Hisureba Hana Nari. If it is hidden, it is the flower. The rest is sharper. If it is not hidden, it cannot be the flower. On the surface, you take this for a stage trick. Conceal your technique, preserve the mystery. He means that too, but he does not stop there. For a thing to be the flower, the audience cannot know it is coming, and to some degree, the performer cannot fully know either. A completely calculated moment looks calculated. If you want the audience to feel something is happening for the first time, there has to be some version of that in the room, which is why the hidden flower is the hardest thing to keep as you master a craft. After a certain point, you have nothing left to hide. You know all of it. For 600 years, this was an artist's observation. Then in 1942, a psychologist tested it. Abraham Luchins gave people 3 jars of different sizes and the task of measuring out a specific amount of water. Several problems, one after another. What the subjects did not know is that the first problems were all built to have the same solution. Fill the big jar, pour off the medium, pour off the small one twice. It worked every time. After 5 or 6 repetitions, people stopped thinking and simply ran the sequence. Then Luchins gave them a problem where the sequence still worked, but a much simpler solution also existed. 2 steps instead of 3. Plainly there if you looked. Most of them did not look. Then he gave them one where the sequence did not work at all, and a substantial number concluded the problem was impossible. Not hard, impossible. They had a working method. The method had failed, therefore there was no solution. The control group, who had never learned the sequence, solved it immediately. Luchins called it Einstellung, mechanization, a mind so well trained it can no longer see the thing it was trained on. And now the detail that matters most, the one that turns this from a curiosity into a tool. Luchins ran it again. This time, before the critical problem, he said 2 words, "Don't be blind." More than half of them found the simple solution. Nothing about their knowledge changed. Nothing about the problem changed. The only difference is that someone told them at the right moment that they might be looking straight at the answer without seeing it, and that was enough. The blindness is real. It is also thinner than it feels, which brings us back to Zeami and the strange thing he does in Kakyo. He does not simply say, "Keep your beginner's mind." He says there are 3. You will need all 3, and each arrives at a different point in a life. The first is Zehi no Shoshin, the beginner's mind of your youth. Zehi means right and wrong. This is the Shoshin of the stage when you could not yet tell the 2 apart. working by trial and error, producing bad work, slowly learning why it was bad. Do not forget this, he says, not as a fond memory, as a reference point. If you cannot recall what it felt like to not know, you have lost your only measure of how far you came, and you have lost the ability to recognize that state when it returns. The second is Tokidoki no Shoshin, the beginner's mind of each moment. This is the one that catches people off guard. A career is not one long climb, it is a series of stages, and every time you step into a new one, you are a beginner again, in a role you have never played, in a body that no longer carries what it used to, in front of an audience that has changed and no longer sees you as the person you were. He is warning against one specific failure, reaching a plateau and mistaking it for the summit. The performer who believes he has arrived stops noticing that the ground under him moved, and he is exact about when. Not in the early years, the young actor knows he is young, and that knowledge protects him. The danger is the middle, the decade in which a performer is technically at his peak and has just enough evidence to believe the peak is permanent. That is where careers go quiet without notice, including to the person it is happening to. The third is Rogo no Shoshin, the beginner's mind of old age. Zeami wrote this as an old man, about old men, and it is the hardest of the three. In your own experience, there is no precedent for the last stage of a life. You have never been this old before. Everything you learned was learned by a younger body with different capacities. The accumulated technique of a lifetime does not carry you across that line. At the end, as at the start, you are working without a map, and the only honest posture is the beginner's. 10 years after he wrote it, he was tested on it. At 71, the shogun exiled him to the island of Sado. His own nephew had become the court's favorite, and Zeami lost everything he had built. His standing, his audience, the stage he had spent a lifetime making. He was there 7 years. He returned only after the shogun died, and he died 2 years after that. He wrote The Beginner's Mind of Old Age in theory. Then he had to live in it. Notice what the three have in common. None is about attitude. Each is about locating yourself accurately. Zeami is not asking for humility. He is asking for correct information about your own position, which is a much colder and more useful request. So what do you do with this? Not stay curious. That instruction has never worked on anybody, because curiosity is a feeling, and you cannot summon a feeling by deciding to. Luchins gives the practical version, and it is not glamorous. He did not retrain his subjects or take their expertise away. He interrupted them at the moment of highest confidence and told them that confidence is where the failure happens. That is the whole method. Not a mindset, a trigger. The signal is the feeling of already knowing. When a problem arrives and you recognize it instantly, when the answer is obvious before you have finished reading the question, when you catch yourself thinking, I've seen this, that is the moment. Not the moment of difficulty, the moment of ease. Difficulty already makes you look. Ease is what does not. And this is not free. If you question every recognition, you will never finish anything. The entire value of expertise is being able to pass without asking. What Zeami wants is for you to stop at the one decision in 10 that needs it. And that one is usually the decision that felt most comfortable. Zeami spent 60 years on a stage, and this was the conclusion he reached. What threatens a master is never the difficult role. It is the role that has become easy. You are not going to stop building categories. That is what a mind does. And the alternative to expertise is not clear sight. It is helplessness. The beginner sees everything and understands none of it. That is not a state worth returning to. What Zeami describes is narrower and stranger. He wants you to carry, alongside all your skill, an accurate memory of the person who did not have it, so that when the thing in front of you does not fit, some part of you still remembers what it was like to look without knowing. He did not promise this would be pleasant. The flower belongs to the performer who does not yet know what he is doing, he said. Then he spent the rest of his life explaining how a man who knows exactly what he is doing might get it back.